Frostbite Feast. Dinner is served, but who's on the menu? By Win Valentine. Copyright C. 2024 by Win Valentine. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, stored, or transmitted in any form by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, scanning, or otherwise without written permission from the publisher. It is illegal to copy this book, post it to a website, or distribute it by any other means without permission. This novel is entirely a work of fiction. The names, characters, and incidents portrayed in it are the work of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events or localities, is entirely coincidental. Win Valentine asserts the moral right to be identified as the author of this work. Designations used by companies to distinguish their products are often claimed as trademarks. All brand names and product names used in this book and on its cover are trade names, service marks, trademarks, and registered trademarks of their respective owners. The publishers and the book are not associated with any product or vendor mentioned in this book. None of the companies referenced within the book have endorsed the book. Prologue. Ice to meet you. The small frosty cabin in the heart of the storm had seen better centuries. The ice-paneled walls glistened in the pale moonlight, but the structure groaned under the weight of another year's failures. Inside, Jack Frost paced back and forth, his boots crunching on the perpetually frozen floor. His breath misted in the frigid air, though it was more out of frustration than the cold. 160 years old and still living in my basement, Jack muttered, shooting a pointed glare at the empty space above him. At their age, I was leading hunts, not filming dance routines on whatever that TikTok thing is. Elsa Frost sat at the dining table, her elegant features pulled into a frown. She was swirling a spoon in a teacup, though the liquid inside was as frozen as her patience. "Well, you were never good at leading hunts either," she said, not looking up. Jack froze mid-step. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Elsa said airily, setting down her spoon with a clink. "You've always been too polite, Jack. What kind of cannibal says, 'Would you mind terribly if we, ate you?' You'd frighten a snowman less than a heat wave would." Jack opened his mouth to retort but quickly closed it. She wasn't wrong. He prided himself on decorum, even if it didn't exactly instill terror. "At least I'm not the one who gets distracted by Pinterest halfway through a hunt," he shot back, crossing his arms. "Excuse me for trying to elevate the family tradition," Elsa snapped, rising from her chair. "It's called presentation, Jack. Nobody wants to be eaten by someone with no sense of flair." "Eaten?" Jack scoffed. "You can't even keep them in one piece long enough to start cooking." The two stared at each other for a long moment before slumping back into their respective chairs with frosty sighs. "This is getting embarrassing, Elsa," Jack said quietly. "We're what, 800 years old now?" "Give or take a few decades," Elsa mumbled. "And in all that time, we've barely managed a decent feast. Our ancestors would be mortified." Elsa straightened, brushing a few errant snowflakes off her icy blue gown. "We're not giving up. This year will be different." "Oh, really? How?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "We've moved to a new neighborhood," Elsa said, a sly smile curling her lips. "Fresh start. Fresh prey." Jack rubbed his temples. "That's what you said in the Victorian era. Remember the fiasco with that chimney sweep?" Elsa waved him off. "Details. This time, I have a plan. We'll go traditional. A friendly neighborhood Christmas dinner. We act normal, lull them into a false sense of security, and..." She clapped her hands together with a satisfying crackle of ice. Jack didn't look convinced. We've been blending in for centuries and still haven't managed to actually pull it off. Even the twins are losing faith. Elsa rolled her eyes. The twins are on a sugar-fueled rebellion phase. They'll come around once they realize how important this is. Jack sighed, slumping in his chair. If this doesn't work, we're done. No more hunting, no more family feasts. I'll just hang up my scarf and... He shuddered. Get a job. Elsa gasped. Don't be ridiculous, Jack. This year, we'll prove we're still worthy of the Frost legacy. Jack didn't answer immediately, his icy blue eyes fixed on the swirling storm outside the window. Finally, he nodded. Fine. One more chance. But if we fail this time... We won't, Elsa interrupted, already envisioning a perfectly frosted dining table and the Brightons' clueless faces. Jack didn't share her confidence, but he rose and dusted the frost off his shoulders. One more chance, he muttered, and this time, no distractions. Elsa smirked. Not even Pinterest. Jack narrowed his eyes but didn't reply. Outside, the snowstorm howled as the Frosts plotted their latest attempt at reclaiming their legacy and hopefully avoiding another century of failure. Deck the halls with ice and oddities. Sarah Brighton stood on her tiptoes, stretching to hang yet another sparkly garland across the living room archway. The metallic tinsel caught the afternoon light, sending little dancing reflections across the walls. A little to the left, she called to John, who was currently losing a battle with a stubborn tangle of Christmas lights that seemed determined to take him prisoner. I think these lights are plotting against me, John muttered, somehow managing to further knot the strand around his wrist and partially up his forearm like a festive handcuff. You could say they're really trying to string me along. He wiggled his captured arm helplessly, only succeeding in tightening the bonds. John, please, Sarah sighed, though a smile tugged at her lips as she watched her husband's predicament. Everything needs to be perfect for the new neighbors. The Frosts seem so sophisticated. She adjusted the garland for the 5th time in as many minutes, squinting critically at its placement. In the kitchen, Emily hunched over her algebra homework, trying to ignore her mother's steady stream of worry while attempting to solve a particularly stubborn equation about trains leaving different stations. The numbers swam before her eyes as her mother's voice carried from the living room. What if they don't like turkey? What if they're vegetarians? What if they're allergic to cranberries? Sarah fretted, adjusting and readjusting a centerpiece of pine cones and holly until each piece was positioned with mathematical precision. Her hands fluttered over the arrangement like nervous birds. Emily glanced up, frowning at the window beside her. Delicate patterns of frost were creeping across the glass, spreading like icy lace despite the mild December afternoon. The intricate designs seemed almost deliberately artistic, as if drawn by an invisible hand. Mom, did you turn the air conditioning on or something? Of course not, honey. Max! No! Max had seized the opportunity of his mother's distraction to reach for the bowl of cookie dough on the counter. His eager grab sent the bowl spinning like a sugar-loaded top, and raw dough splattered across the floor in a festive explosion that somehow managed to hit every cabinet within a 3-foot radius. I just wanted to taste it, Max said, looking down at the mess with wide eyes, a guilty glob of dough still stuck to his finger. Sarah's smile didn't waver as she grabbed paper towels, her hostess instincts kicking into overdrive. That's okay, sweetie. We can make more, The doorbell chimed, its cheerful tone sending Sarah bolt upright like a startled deer. Oh, no, no, They're 2 hours early." She smoothed her red and green sweater, decorated with prancing reindeer that seemed to dance with her nervous movements. "John, get the door." "Coming, coming." John extracted himself from the lights with as much dignity as he could muster, leaving behind a few strands that refused to release their grip, and headed to the entrance. He pulled open the door to reveal 5 pale figures, surrounded by gently swirling snowflakes, despite the complete lack of snow anywhere else in the neighborhood. The flakes seemed to dance around them like a personal weather system. "Welcome," John beamed at them, channeling his best teacher greeting parents energy. "Talk about a frosty reception." The Frosts stared at him, their icy blue faces completely expressionless, like a collection of frozen mannequins. Finally, Mr. Frost's mouth twitched in what might have been an attempt at a smile, or possibly a facial spasm. Elsa Frost glided past John, her silvery dress seeming to float around her as if suspended in water. She immediately zeroed in on Max and Emily, reaching out to touch their cheeks with fingers that felt like icicles fresh from a freezer. My, so fresh, so tender, such rosy cheeks. Her touch left little patches of frost that slowly melted on their skin. "Oh, how European!" Sarah laughed, a touch too brightly, her voice climbing an octave higher than usual. "Please, come in, come in." Emily retreated to the stairs, pulling out her notebook with the speed of someone documenting evidence at a crime scene. The Frost twins, Noel and Carol, were examining the family photos on the wall with unsettling intensity, occasionally whispering to each other, and... Was that tongue licking? Their tongues left little frozen spots on the glass of the frames. "Want to see my new game?" Max grabbed the twins' hands, apparently unbothered by their Arctic temperature, and dragged them to the TV with the fearless enthusiasm only a 10-year-old could muster. "It's called Frostfighter 3. The twins exchanged confused looks as Max demonstrated the controls, their perfectly synchronized head tilts making them look like matching ice sculptures. Carol reached out and touched the screen, leaving a patch of actual ice that spread in crystalline patterns. "Why can't we just freeze things directly?" "Let me show you around." Sarah jumped in, leading the adult Frosts on a tour with the desperate energy of a realtor trying to sell a haunted house. Elsa trailed her fingers along the walls, leaving ribbons of frost in her wake that formed elaborate swirling patterns. "Oh dear, you must be chilly. I'll adjust the thermostat." Emily followed them to the kitchen, where Mrs. Frost had discovered their knife block. She pulled out the carving knife with the reverence usually reserved for sacred artifacts, testing its edge with disturbing enthusiasm. Yes, perfect for carving. Such clean cuts. Her eyes gleamed with an unnaturally bright light. "John's quite the amateur chef," Sarah said nervously, unconsciously stepping between Mrs. Frost and the remaining knives. Meanwhile, John had cornered Mr. Frost by the fireplace, which seemed to dim slightly in the pale man's presence. "So, what do you think about the War of 1812? Fascinating period, right?" He launched into full history teacher mode, completely missing how Mr. Frost's expression grew increasingly glazed. Mr. Frost blinked slowly, like a lizard contemplating its next meal. "I prefer 1823. Things were simpler then, before all this electricity." He pronounced the last word as if it personally offended him. Emily watched in horror as Max, determined to impress the twins, ran around blowing exaggerated breaths on various objects, his cheeks puffed out like a chipmunk's. "Look, I'm doing ice magic too." His attempts left nothing but slightly damp spots on the furniture. "Oh!" Sarah clapped her hands together, the sound sharp enough to make everyone jump. "Dinner will be ready in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail." Every member of the Frost family suddenly snapped to attention, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural light that made them look like a collection of winter-themed predators. "Lamb?" they asked in perfect unison, their voices harmonizing in an eerily beautiful chorus of hunger. "A frosty first impression." Emily watched from her perch on the stairs as her dad burst through the front door, grocery bags clutched to his chest and a swirl of snow following him inside like an uninvited guest. The flakes seemed oddly attracted to the Frost family, dancing around them before melting into nothing, though a few rebellious snowflakes managed to settle on Elsa's platinum hair like a crystalline crown. "Did you get the cranberry sauce? The organic kind?" Her mom pounced before John could even set down the bags, practically vibrating with hostess anxiety. "Well, funny story about that," John began, but Emily's attention shifted to the living room where Max sprawled on the floor with the Frost twins looming over him. They made exaggerated chomping sounds, snapping their unnaturally sharp teeth mere inches from his face, their movements oddly synchronized like a pair of predatory ballerinas. Emily's pen flew across her notebook, documenting every detail of their pointed incisors and the way frost seemed to form with each exhale. "Your brother is absolutely delicious," Carol declared, while Noelle nodded enthusiastically, a thin layer of ice spreading beneath their feet. "Delightful," Noelle added, both twins speaking with the precise diction of people trying very hard to sound human, like they'd learned English from a particularly stuffy Victorian novel. In the kitchen, Jack Frost hovered near Sarah as she checked the oven, his reflection mysteriously absent in the appliance's shiny surface. "So you don't use open flame?" he asked, peering at the appliance like it might bite him. "Or fresh blood? I mean, broth?" His fingers drummed nervously on the counter, leaving little frozen fingerprints that quickly evaporated. "Oh no, just conventional heating," Sarah chirped, her smile growing more strained by the minute, crow's feet deepening around her eyes. Meanwhile, Elsa glided around the dining room table, her fingers trailing frost across every surface with the intensity of a wedding planner on deadline. "The fork goes here," she muttered, shifting place settings with surgical precision. "And this napkin fold is simply barbaric." Ice crystals spread across the linen like delicate lace, forming intricate patterns that looked suspiciously like tiny screaming faces. "How festive," Sarah managed, her hostess smile now practically cemented in place, a muscle twitching beneath her left eye. John, clearly sensing the tension, rushed to the smart speaker with the desperate energy of a man trying to defuse a bomb. "Who's ready for some Christmas classics?" he called out cheerfully. "Alexa, play Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer." The Frost's reactions were immediate and bizarre. Jack's face contorted in confusion, while Elsa's nose wrinkled in disgust, a small flurry of snow swirling around her head like an agitated halo. "Reindeer should be served rare," she commented. "Very rare." "Raw," Noel and Carol added in unison, then immediately began chasing Max around the dining room table, making what Emily assumed were supposed to be wolf howls, but sounded more like winter wind through bare trees, leaving a trail of frost in their wake. "We don't play with our food. We don't run indoors, dears," Elsa snapped, her voice sharp as an icicle, the temperature dropping several degrees with each word. Emily cornered her mother in the kitchen, dodging the growing patches of ice on the floor. "Mom, seriously? The weird comments about eating us, the ice powers, the fact that they literally make things freeze by touching them. She gestured wildly at the increasingly frozen kitchen. "Honey, everyone has their quirks," Sarah insisted, struggling with the turkey that had somehow frozen solid in the last 5 minutes, her knuckles white on the roasting pan. "Besides, they're just enthusiastic about winter." The overhead lights flickered ominously as Jack cleared his throat, frost creeping up the walls like ivy. "Speaking of enthusiasm," he announced, "let me tell you about our family traditions. When selecting our dinner companions, we prefer the young and tender." A massive gust of wind cut him off as the house plunged into darkness. Emily heard her mother's determinedly cheerful voice ring out, "How festive! I'll get some candles." As Sarah bustled around lighting candles, Emily noticed an eerie blue glow coming from the Frost twins' eyes, pulsing slightly with each blink. Max, naturally, was entranced. "This is the coolest thing ever," he exclaimed, trying to make his own eyes glow by squinting really hard, his face turning red with effort. "Who's up for ghost stories?" John suggested, settling into his favorite armchair with forced casualness. "I know a great one about fresh victims. Victorian murders." The Frosts leaned forward as one, their eyes gleaming in the candlelight like hungry cats spotting a mouse. Emily watched Noel actually lick his lips, leaving a small icicle dangling from his chin. "Well," Sarah announced, her voice slightly higher than usual, like a kettle about to whistle, "dinner will be slightly delayed due to our unexpected power outage." "Such a shame," Jack sighed, looking genuinely crestfallen, a single snowflake falling from his eye like a tear. "I was so looking forward to our feast." "Never mind," Elsa interjected, her fingers already crafting intricate ice sculptures across the table, including what looked suspiciously like frozen human figures in various poses of terror. "I'll just pass the time by redecorating." Emily added another bullet point to her growing list of evidence. "Definitely not human," underlining it 3 times for emphasis as frost crept across the edges of her notebook. "Cookies, clues, and chaos." Emily watched from the kitchen doorway as her mother led Elsa through their gleaming kitchen, her phone held up as a convenient shield while she scribbled observations in her notebook. The granite countertops sparkled under the warm kitchen lights, a stark contrast to the otherworldly chill that seemed to follow their guest. "The secret to perfect gravy," Sarah explained, gesturing enthusiastically at their stovetop, where various pots bubbled merrily, "is all in the timing, and of course, constant stirring. You can't let those lumps form." Elsa nodded absently, trailing her fingers along the granite countertop. Delicate frost patterns bloomed in her wake, spreading like crystalline ivy across the expensive stone. The intricate designs resembled something from a high-end Pinterest board gone horribly wrong. She paused at the microwave, tapping it with one perfectly manicured nail that sparkled with what Emily swore were actual ice crystals. And this contraption? For warming things? "Oh yes, though not for gravy. That needs proper stovetop attention. Here, would you mind giving this a stir?" Sarah handed over the family's cherished silver gravy boat, apparently oblivious to the way ice crystals were creeping up its ornately carved sides like tiny frozen vines. Elsa grasped the ladle, her perfectly poised grip at odds with the disaster that followed. Instantly, the entire content solidified with a soft crackling sound that reminded Emily of lake ice forming in winter. "Oh my," she tittered, her laugh like breaking icicles in a wind chime. "My hands are just so cold today. Must be the weather. You know how it gets this time of year." Sarah's hostess smile barely faltered as she attacked the frozen gravy with a spoon, the metal making sharp pinging sounds against the solidified sauce. "No worries. We'll just chip it into smaller portions, like a granita." "Hey, look on the bright side." John wandered in, wearing his favorite Kiss the Cook apron and grinning from ear to ear. "At least we won't need to refrigerate the leftovers." "Left-overs?" Elsa's face scrunched in genuine confusion, as if John had just suggested they should eat the plates too. "You mean you don't consume everything in one sitting?" Emily's pen flew across her notebook, the pages already crinkled from her tight grip. "Doesn't understand basic food storage? Possible alien, supernatural eating habits?" The situation deteriorated further when Elsa insisted on checking the turkey's doneness. One touch of her finger, and the entire bird transformed into a frozen masterpiece, complete with tiny ice crystals sparkling across its surface like a macabre winter wedding cake. "Oh dear," Elsa murmured, examining the crystallized poultry with what looked suspiciously like artistic pride. Under her breath, she added, "Such a waste. Fresh fear adds such a delightful flavor. These humans cook all the terror right out." Her fingers twitched as if imagining a different kind of meal entirely. Emily's eyes widened as she added another note, pressing so hard with her pen that it nearly tore through the paper. "Definitely talking about eating people. Check local missing persons." "Can I help? Can I help?" Max came barreling into the kitchen like a small tornado, his socks sliding on the hardwood floor. Elsa whirled around with supernatural grace, hiding her hands behind her back, leaving 2 perfect frost handprints on the wall that looked disturbingly like crime scene markers. Sarah, looking increasingly frazzled but maintaining her hostess smile with the determination of a professional realtor, jumped in. "Actually, Elsa, why don't you help with the table decorations? You seem to have such an eye for detail." She cast a worried glance at the frozen turkey, which was now sporting what looked like tiny icicle fangs. Elsa's face lit up with an otherworldly glow that made Emily check her phone's EMF detector app. "Oh, yes." She practically floated to the dining room, her movements too smooth to be entirely human, where she began crafting elaborate ice sculptures. What started as elegant swans quickly evolved into more disturbing forms: wolves with bared teeth, ravens with gleaming eyes, and what looked suspiciously like human figures running in terror. Each piece was exquisitely detailed, down to the expressions of horror on the tiny frozen faces. Emily followed at a safe distance, her thermometer app recording the dramatic temperature drops wherever Elsa passed. The dining room was rapidly becoming a winter wonderland's darker cousin, like something out of a fairy tale where the fairy godmother had decidedly sinister intentions. Back in the kitchen, John had produced Sarah's hairdryer and was attempting to defrost the turkey, the warm air creating clouds of steam that made the room look like a special effects studio. Elsa appeared in the doorway, horror etched across her features, as if she'd witnessed someone committing a crime against winter itself. "You're ruining perfectly good meat," she gasped, wringing her hands as frost spiraled up the doorframe. "The natural flavors are best preserved when served raw. The fear stays so much fresher that way." Her eyes took on a dreamy, almost predatory gleam. "The fear?" Emily couldn't help herself, her detective instincts overwhelming her survival ones. "The, flavor. I meant flavor." Elsa's recovery was quick but unconvincing, like a vampire trying to explain away a cape collection. She turned to Sarah, who was surveying the disaster zone of partially frozen side dishes, with the desperate optimism of someone trying to salvage a cooking show gone wrong. Why not serve everything as is? A nice tartare, perhaps? Or carpaccio? Raw food is very trendy right now. Emily stepped forward, notebook raised like a shield, her collection of evidence demanding to be heard. Okay, what's really going on here? The ice powers, the weird comments about eating people, the temperature drops. But Elsa simply raised one elegant hand, ice crystals swirling around her fingers like a miniature galaxy of frozen stars. In seconds, she had crafted a perfect ice rose, so beautiful it seemed to glow from within, its petals catching the light like trapped rainbows. Everyone in the kitchen fell silent, momentarily mesmerized by its ethereal beauty, their concerns temporarily frozen like everything else in the kitchen. Now then, Elsa smiled, frost glittering at the corners of her mouth like diamond dust. Shall we focus on making this dinner perfect? The word perfect hung in the air like an icicle, beautiful and sharp, frozen facts and fiery suspicions. Emily perched on the stairs, her notebook balanced on her knees as she pretended to read. The perfect vantage point to observe the increasingly bizarre evening unfolding in her living room. Through the banister slats, she watched Jack Frost corner the twins in the hallway, his attempt at an intimidating whisper carrying clearly to her hiding spot. The way his breath crystallized in the air with each word made her grip her pen tighter. "Remember the plan," Jack's voice crackled with frost. "Make them trust you before we— Wait, are you even listening? This is serious family business." He punctuated each word with a frustrated puff of icy air. Noel and Carol stood shoulder to shoulder, their white heads bent over their phones, thumbs flying across the screens. Neither bothered to look up at their father. The temperature around them dropped several degrees, making the hallway photos frost over at their edges. "Uh-huh," Noel mumbled, pausing only to adjust their perfectly styled hair. "Totally," Carol added, clearly focused on something else entirely. A small snowflake materialized above their head, spinning lazily before dissolving. The twins glided into the living room with that unnaturally smooth movement that made Emily's skin prickle. Her pen scratched across the page. No footsteps, like floating. Check security cameras for shadows. They left the faintest trace of frost in their wake, delicate patterns that disappeared almost as quickly as they formed, leaving behind only the faintest scent of winter pine. "This lighting is everything," Carol declared, shoving the coffee table aside with impossible ease, sending her mother's carefully arranged potpourri sliding. "We need space for the routine. The algorithm loves wide shots." But which song? Noel scrolled through their phone, each swipe leaving tiny ice crystals on the screen that they absently brushed away. "It has to be perfect. We can't waste this aesthetic. What about that new Arctic Monkeys track?" Emily's attention caught on how their feet never quite seemed to touch the ground, how their movements flowed like water in winter. Beautiful, but wrong. The way they seemed to hover just millimeters above the floor made her stomach twist. She added another note. "Definitely not human. Maybe ice spirits, demons." Check folklore. Winter entities, plus social media presence. "Can I be in your video?" Max burst into the room, practically vibrating with excitement. His Spider-Man socks slipped slightly on the residual frost, but he didn't seem to notice. The twins exchanged a look that made Emily's protective instincts flare. Carol's smile appeared practiced, like someone who'd learned human expressions from a manual. Their teeth gleamed just a bit too white, too sharp. "Sure, tiny human. Stand way over there." Carol pointed to the far corner. "Like by the window. Further, little more." Each instruction pushed Max closer to the drafty bay window where their frost patterns were thickest. Music filled the room as the twins took their positions. Their dance started perfectly synchronized, their movements precise and ethereal, until Noel's foot touched down, instantly creating a sheet of ice across the hardwood. The crystalline patterns spread like lightning strikes across the floor. "You're ruining our flow," Carol hissed, silver eyes flashing with an inner light that reminded Emily of moonlight on fresh snow. "Me? You're the one who's off beat. Your transitions are totally glacial." Emily found herself drawn into their argument despite herself, especially when they started debating camera angles with the intensity of professional directors. She noted how their eyes glowed brighter with each heated exchange, like mercury catching moonlight. Small icicles formed and melted on their fingertips as they gestured dramatically. Her phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. Notifications flooded her screen, all from TikTok, all about @FrostTwins' latest video. Emily clicked, momentarily forgetting her investigation as she fell into a rabbit hole of their content. Their previous videos showed them dancing in blizzards, creating impossible ice sculptures, and doing challenges that should have given them hypothermia. "This is not what we discussed." Emily jumped at Jack's booming voice, nearly dropping her phone. He stood in the doorway, trying to project menacing authority, but the effect was somewhat ruined by Max attempting to copy the twins' moves in the background, complete with sound effects for the ice powers he wished he had. "Dad, we're working here," Noel said without looking up, casually catching a falling icicle before it could hit the carpet. "OMG, Carol, look, we're trending. #frosted moves is taking off. We've got influencers reaching out." "I don't care about trending." Jack made air quotes with frosted fingers, leaving small snowflakes floating in their wake. "We have a sacred family tradition to uphold, and you're turning it into some sort of social media circus. Your grandmother would freeze in her ice cave if she saw this." Emily's attention snapped back to her investigation, but she couldn't help watching as Noel spun too fast, their human glamour flickering for a split second. Their true form, all ice and starlight and ancient winter, flashed through before snapping back into place. The comments on the video exploded. "Amazing effects!" "How did you do that transition?" "Best CGI I've seen." Emily quickly sketched what she'd glimpsed, her pencil moving frantically across the page. Max, still attempting the routine, slipped on one of their frost trails and went sliding across the floor with a delighted shriek. His wool socks left zigzagging patterns in the ice as he spun. The twins' eyes lit up simultaneously, actual snowflakes dancing in their irises. "Quick, do that again." Carol aimed their phone. "This is perfect for our clumsy little brother challenge. The engagement will be insane." Sarah's head poked around the corner, drawn by the commotion. Her holiday sweater sparkled with actual frost where she'd brushed against the walls. "Everything okay in here? I thought I heard ice cracking." Carol's phone sparked and froze in their hands, and they quickly tucked it behind their back, leaving a trail of droplets as the device began to thaw. "Just making some content, Mrs. Brighton. Your house has amazing natural lighting." Emily watched her mother smile and nod, completely missing the way frost crept up the walls or how Carol's phone dripped onto the carpet, creating tiny frozen puddles that reflected impossible colors. A notification lit up Emily's screen. The twins' agent was calling, the contact photo showing a suspiciously blue-tinted person. Jack's face fell into his hands as Carol answered with professional cheer, ice crystals forming in their perfectly styled hair. Looking down at her notebook full of damning evidence, Emily realized she'd spent the last hour watching their TikTok channel instead of building her case. Her latest note read, "Possible theory, winter influencers equals modern evolution of ancient ice spirits?" She had to admit, though, they were pretty entertaining for a family of winter monsters. Their latest video already had 1 million views, and she found herself hitting follow before she could stop herself. A snowball's chance in the basement. Jack followed John down the creaky basement stairs, practicing his most menacing expression in the shadows. Each step groaned beneath their feet as John whistled, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, with cheerful abandon, completely undermining Jack's attempt at building suspense. The dank air should have felt oppressive, but John's relentless good cheer seemed to chase away even the basement's natural gloom. "Watch that third step," John called back, pausing to demonstrate the wobble. "It's a bit wonky. Been meaning to fix it all year. You know how it goes. Summer's too hot, fall's too busy with school starting." Jack suppressed a sigh, his carefully cultivated aura of menace dissolving like snowflakes in summer. He positioned himself between the water heater and a stack of dusty Christmas decorations, ready to make his dramatic entrance. But John had already turned away, fumbling with his flashlight. A plastic Santa toppled from the pile, its jolly face mocking Jack's attempts at intimidation. "Now, where did I put those spare bulbs?" John muttered, rummaging through a shelf cluttered with holiday supplies and forgotten DIY projects. "Ah, here we go. Always keep extras. Learned that lesson after the great Christmas light disaster of 2019. Jack cleared his throat and stepped forward, ice crystals forming beneath his feet in an intricate pattern of deadly frost. The Frost family has certain appetites. His voice echoed ominously against the concrete walls, but the effect was completely lost on his audience. "Oh, we're big foodies too," John beamed, turning around with an armful of light bulbs that clinked together cheerfully. "Sarah's always trying new recipes. Have you tried her cranberry sauce? Secret ingredient is orange zest. Though between you and me, I think the real secret is the cinnamon she sneaks in when nobody's looking." Upstairs, a sudden crash followed by delighted squealing interrupted Jack's response. Through the ceiling, he heard Max's voice. "This is awesome. The windows are like an ice rink." The sound of sliding furniture and giggling suggested the twins were being less than subtle with their powers. Jack pinched the bridge of his nose, knowing exactly what the twins were up to. He needed to focus. Brandishing an icicle that materialized in his hand with a theatrical flourish of frost, he tried again. "We have ways of dealing with those who cross us." The icicle sparkled menacingly in the dim basement light, its razor-sharp tip glinting with supernatural malice. "Like a secret family recipe?" John's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "How wonderful! You know, I've got this incredible sugar cookie recipe passed down from my grandmother. The trick is..." He patted his pockets, presumably searching for the recipe. Another crash from above, followed by Sarah's voice. "Who's making all that thumping?" The ceiling creaked ominously as what sounded like an impromptu skating party continued overhead. "Just practicing our TikTok moves, Mrs. Brighton." Carol's voice carried through the floorboards, followed by what was unmistakably the sound of a snowball fight. A muffled argument about proper hashtag usage drifted down between the impacts. Jack's icicle began to droop, its deadly point softening like ice cream on a summer sidewalk. This was not going according to plan at all. He opened his mouth to try another threatening line, but John was already moving toward a small mini-fridge tucked behind some boxes, humming Jingle Bells under his breath. "Say, you look like you could use some holiday cheer." John pulled out 2 glasses and a carton of eggnog with a flourish worthy of a game show host. "This really helps with the holiday stress, doesn't it? Nothing beats homemade eggnog, Sarah's specialty. She adds just a hint of nutmeg." Well, Jack accepted the glass automatically, his rehearsed speech crumbling like a poorly packed snowball. The moment the glass touched his hand, the eggnog froze solid with a soft clink, tiny ice crystals dancing across its surface in delicate patterns. "Wow, that's some grip you've got there," John laughed, pulling out a leather-bound photo album from nearby. "Speaking of ice-cold moments, let me show you our family vacation photos. This is us at the Grand Canyon. Speaking of Grand Canyons, did you hear about the cheese that got lost?" He flipped open the album with practiced enthusiasm. Jack stared at his frozen eggnog, pretending to sip it while John flipped through page after page of sun-drenched family photos. Above them, the chaos continued to unfold, punctuated by Max's gleeful shouts and what sounded suspiciously like Sarah saying, "Oh, how creative! They must have found the craft snow in with the decorations." The sound of tinsel being repurposed as skating rink decorations filtered through the ceiling. "And this is Emily's science fair project from last year," John continued, oblivious to Jack's internal crisis. He pointed to a photo of complicated charts and crystals. "She did a whole presentation on crystallization. You know, given your name, I bet you'd find that fascinating. She even won first place. That's my girl, always going for gold." His chest puffed with paternal pride. Jack trudged up the stairs 15 minutes later, John still chattering behind him about family vacations and an endless stream of dad jokes that seemed to multiply like rabbits. His grand plan had been completely derailed by holiday cheer and family photos. As they reached the top of the stairs, he caught sight of the living room, now transformed into a winter wonderland complete with perfectly spherical snowballs and elaborate frost patterns climbing the walls. A thin layer of powder snow covered everything, and what appeared to be an improvised luge track ran from the coffee table to the front door. "Ah, kids and their crafts," John chuckled, closing his photo album with a satisfied pat. "They're snow creative, aren't they? Get it? Snow instead of sew?" He nudged Jack with his elbow, grinning expectantly at his own wordplay. The Ice Queen's Pinterest dreams. Emily's heart pounded as she eased open the guest room door, wincing at the faint creak of ancient hinges. The temperature plummeted instantly, her breath forming tiny clouds in the frigid air that danced and dissipated like miniature ghosts. When her fingers brushed the doorknob, delicate frost patterns spread across the metal like living lace, creating intricate swirls that would have been beautiful if they weren't so terrifying. The room itself was immaculate, suspiciously so, as if someone had staged it for a home decor magazine shoot gone horribly wrong. Several matching leather suitcases stood in perfect formation against the wall, each bearing strange symbols etched in ice that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. Emily crept closer, phone ready to document the evidence, her sock-clad feet silent on the hardwood floor. The largest bag suddenly snapped its clasps like teeth, making her jump back with a muffled squeak that she desperately hoped hadn't carried down the hallway. "Okay, that's definitely not normal luggage," she muttered, moving on to investigate the dresser while keeping one eye on the menacing bags. A collection of snow globes caught her attention, particularly one that seemed to contain its own miniature blizzard, complete with microscopic lightning flashes. Emily picked it up, noticing tiny figures swirling in the storm, their features unnervingly detailed. When she gave it a gentle shake, the figures pressed against the glass, their microscopic faces contorted in silent screams, tiny hands leaving frost-rimmed prints that faded like breath on a mirror. She nearly dropped the globe, setting it down with trembling hands and accidentally nudging it into perfect alignment with its companions. That's when she spotted Elsa's laptop, its screen still glowing with an ethereal blue light that cast strange shadows on the walls. Emily's eyes widened as she scrolled through Pinterest boards with titles that made her stomach lurch. Cozy Winter Feasts, Human Edition, featured disturbing recipe variations and far too many references to long pork, while 30 Creative Ways to Trap Holiday Guests was filled with elaborate ice maze designs and suspiciously specific tips about load-bearing ice sculptures. A shelf of mason jars drew her attention next, their contents shifting and swirling in the dim light. Each bore a neat label in flowing script, Fear Extract, which emitted a faint whimper when touched and smelled suspiciously like her brother Max's panic sweat. Holiday Spirit, literal, containing what looked like actual spirits doing synchronized swimming routines, and Grandma's Special Human Tenderizer, family recipe, the contents of which were thankfully frozen solid but seemed to be humming a Christmas carol. As Emily raised her phone to photograph the jars, something soft brushed against her ankle with the deliberate motion of a pet seeking attention. She looked down to see a knitted scarf slithering across the floor like a wool serpent, its tassels tasting the air like a forked tongue. Before she could react, it wrapped around her leg, tugging insistently as if trying to lead her somewhere, or perhaps alert its owner. Stumbling backward, Emily crashed into a side table covered in festive decorations that looked more appropriate for a medieval torture chamber's holiday party. A leather-bound book tumbled to the floor, its gold-lettered title gleaming in the strange light. To Serve Man, Holiday Edition. Emily bit back a hysterical laugh. This couldn't actually be happening, and yet the book had helpful tabs marked appetizers and main course. The sound of footsteps in the hallway, accompanied by the distinctive crunch of frost forming underfoot, sent her diving under the bed. Her heart threatened to beat right through her chest as she pressed herself against the floor, trying to become one with the dust bunnies. Moments later, Elsa's ice-blue feet entered the room, crystals of frost spreading with each step across the hardwood floor like delicate spider webs. "The lighting is all wrong," Elsa muttered, pacing back and forth in designer boots that left perfect snowflake impressions with each step. "How am I supposed to create the perfect ambiance for entertaining guests with these shadows? The Instagram filters will never compensate for this." Emily watched as Elsa moved to a collection of wicked-looking implements arranged on the dresser, each one gleaming with an unnatural sheen. "These dining tools need to pop more," Elsa declared, adjusting what appeared to be a medieval ice pick until it caught the light just so, sending prismatic rainbows dancing across the ceiling. The animated scarf suddenly unwound from Emily's ankle and slithered toward Elsa like an eager puppy, gesturing emphatically toward the bed with its tassels while performing what looked like an interpretive dance routine. "Oh, stop that!" Elsa scolded, snatching up the scarf with the exasperation of someone dealing with an over-enthusiastic pet. "You're ruining the composition. Accessories should complement the scene, not steal focus. We've talked about this." She folded the scarf into a precise triangle and placed it on a shelf, where it sulked visibly. Emily's nose began to tingle as she watched Elsa experiment with different camera angles, muttering about filters and hashtags while rearranging various implements of destruction into more photogenic configurations. Maybe her winter feast is too obvious, but #human snack time might give away too much. Perhaps hash organic winter dining? No, that sounds like a vegan cafe. A sneeze built in Emily's sinuses as Elsa continued her impromptu photo shoot, adding and removing props like a deranged food stylist. She pressed her sleeve against her nose, willing herself to stay quiet as dust bunnies tickled her face, and a spider wearing what appeared to be a tiny ice crystal crown watched her curiously from the corner. Finally, Elsa swept out of the room, still debating caption options under her breath and leaving a trail of delicate frost ferns in her wake. Emily scrambled out from under the bed and grabbed her phone, only to find the screen covered in elaborate frost patterns that would have been perfect for a winter-themed wallpaper. She frantically swiped and tapped, but her photographic evidence had been transformed into nothing but beautiful, useless swirls of ice that arranged themselves into a mocking smiley face before melting away. Turkey with a side of terror. Sarah bustled into the dining room, an array of steaming dishes balanced precariously in her arms, her perfectly manicured nails gripping each serving bowl with determined cheerfulness. "Everyone find their seats," she chirped, seemingly oblivious to Jack's violent flinch as a plume of steam wafted past his face. He jerked backward so quickly his chair scraped against the floor, leaving tiny frost patterns where his fingers had gripped the wood, the delicate swirls spreading like icy spiderwebs across the polished surface. Emily slid into place between Max and the Frost twins, her notebook tucked discreetly in her lap beneath her carefully arranged napkin. She watched Noel and Carol exchange meaningful glances over Max's head, their silver eyes glinting in the candlelight like predatory cats sizing up potential prey. Her little brother remained completely oblivious, swinging his legs and chattering about their latest TikTok video, his sneakers occasionally bumping against the table legs with enthusiastic thuds. "Which weapon is for the main attack?" Jack whispered to Elsa, holding his fork like a tiny trident and accidentally creating a small patch of frost on the tablecloth. His daughter sighed and adjusted his grip, though she didn't look entirely certain herself, her own silverware arrangement suggesting several false starts. "Just follow my lead," Elsa murmured, reaching into her sleeve with practiced stealth. A small crystal vial labeled "Tenderizing Essence" caught the light, its contents swirling with an otherworldly shimmer. But John's booming voice made her jump. "Elsa, would you mind passing the gravy?" he asked, completely missing the way the gravy boat's contents were starting to develop ice crystals around the edges. The vial slipped from her fingers, bouncing off her plate with a musical ping before rolling under the table, leaving a trail of tiny snowflakes in its wake. Emily tracked its path with her eyes, making a mental note of where it stopped, while simultaneously pretending to adjust her sock. "The small ones are usually more tender," Noah whispered, eyeing Max as he bounced excitedly between the twins, his childish energy making their own stillness seem even more unnatural. Carol shook her head, a few snowflakes falling from her perfectly styled hair. "Yes, but the parents have more meat. Plus, they've had time to marinate in life experiences," she added with a predatory smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Now, Jack," Sarah said warmly, positioning herself behind the turkey with the confidence of someone who'd watched every holiday cooking show on the Food Network. "Let me show you the proper carving technique. It's all in the wrist." She demonstrated with practiced ease, while Jack leaned forward with unsettling focus, his breath creating small ice crystals on the serving platter. "Fascinating," he breathed, unconsciously licking his lips. "Though I imagine the technique differs somewhat with living targets?" He caught himself, tugging nervously at his collar. "Living traditions, I mean. Family traditions. Normal human traditions. The kind that don't involve hunting anything sentient. Emily's attention shifted to the twins' phones, glowing softly beneath the tablecloth like ethereal beacons. Her eyes widened as she caught glimpses of their search history. How to pretend to eat human food. And, can frost giants get food poisoning from cooked meat? Followed by, best recipes for defrosting humans. She added these to her growing list of evidence, though her pen kept developing a thin layer of ice that made writing increasingly difficult. "Did you know?" John began, settling into his professor voice with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting all evening to share this particular tidbit. "That Christmas dinner traditions date back to medieval times? The Yule feast was particularly interesting because—" Elsa nodded mechanically at John's lecture while discreetly trying to prevent her turkey from becoming a meat popsicle, her frustration growing with each failed attempt. Every time she touched her plate, frost crept across its surface like living lace. She resorted to holding her hands above the table, as if conducting an invisible orchestra, occasionally shooting panicked glances at her father. Max watched the twins intently, attempting to mirror their perfectly synchronized movements with the dedication of a devoted apprentice. When they lifted their glasses, he lifted his. When they dabbed their lips with napkins, he followed suit, though he couldn't quite match their unnaturally rigid posture, or the way they seemed to move like a single organism with two heads, their movements precise and practiced to an unsettling degree. Jack suddenly rose to his feet, glass in hand, ice crackling up the stem, where his fingers gripped too tightly. "A toast," he announced, his voice taking on a ceremonial tone that echoed with centuries of predatory tradition. "To this bountiful feast before us. As our ancestors taught us, may we honor the ancient traditions of the hunt, where predator and prey—" "Who wants to sing Jingle Bells?" Sarah interrupted brightly, clapping her hands together with the desperate enthusiasm of someone trying to salvage an increasingly awkward dinner party. The resulting carol was a study in contrasts that would have fascinated musicologists. While Sarah led with enthusiasm and John provided cheerful harmony, the Frost family's participation resembled a group of cats being slowly dragged across a chalkboard, their voices carrying undertones of ancient winter storms. Emily scribbled furiously in her notebook, though the ink kept freezing mid-word, creating a series of increasingly illegible observations. "And now," Sarah announced, rising from her chair with the flourish of a game show host, "who's ready for dessert?" The color drained from Jack's already pale face, leaving him practically transparent. But we haven't even started the main feast yet," he protested weakly, his gaze darting between the Brighton family members with hungry desperation, small icicles forming on his lower lip, flurries of evidence. Sarah led Elsa into the kitchen, their footsteps leaving a peculiar pattern on the linoleum, Sarah's normal prints alongside Elsa's crystalline trail that sparkled under the fluorescent lights. "That drafty window is acting up again," Sarah tutted, completely missing how the frost patterns curled into delicate spirals behind Elsa's every movement, forming intricate snowflakes that danced up the baseboards. In the dining room, Jack paced with increasing agitation, his footsteps creating tiny ice patches with each turn, transforming the hardwood floor into a treacherous winter wonderland. "Centuries of tradition," he muttered, shooting desperate looks at his children while absently adjusting his perfectly starched collar. All that careful planning, ruined by TikTok and interior decorating. His fingers drummed against his leg, leaving small icicles hanging from his pants pocket that tinkled like wind chimes with every step. Emily crept after the twins as they sauntered into the kitchen, her pen poised above her notebook, which was already filled with detailed observations about their unusual body temperature and suspicious lack of breath fog. Noel and Carol barely noticed her presence, too engrossed in their phones and the endless stream of filters at their disposal. "The Clarendon filter definitely makes them look juicier," Noel insisted, adjusting his screen brightness and zooming in on what appeared to be a particularly terrified-looking family portrait. "Plus, it really brings out the blue undertones." "No way," Carol countered, swiping through options with the expertise of a social media influencer. "Valencia brings out their fear flush better. Trust me, I have way more followers than you." Sarah retrieved the Christmas pudding from the counter with a flourish, the dessert wobbling enticingly on its festive plate. "Elsa, would you mind warming this up?" She handed over the dessert, oblivious to the horror spreading across Elsa's face as if she'd been asked to juggle live coals. The moment Elsa's fingers touched the pudding, it transformed with an audible crackle. Ice crystals shot through the dessert, restructuring it into an intricate winter tableau complete with miniature people frozen mid-flee, their tiny faces caught in permanent terror, surrounded by perfectly scaled evergreen trees and diminutive snowdrifts. "Oh," Elsa said weakly, trying to hide her inadvertent artwork behind her back. "I was going for more of a winter wonderland theme." Jack burst through the kitchen door, frost spreading across the doorframe in delicate fractals that would have been beautiful if they weren't so telling. "Children, this is completely unacceptable." "Jack," John appeared behind him, brandishing a fresh glass of eggnog that steamed slightly in the suddenly chilly air. "Nothing like a nightcap to warm the bones, eh?" He chuckled at his own joke, while Jack visibly struggled not to shudder at the word warm, ice crystals forming in his perfectly coiffed hair. Emily squared her shoulders and faced the twins, clutching her notebook like a shield. "You're not actually human, are you?" Her voice carried the triumphant tone of someone who'd finally solved a particularly challenging puzzle. Noel and Carol exchanged glances before flanking Emily, phones raised high with practiced synchronization. "OMG, perfect lighting," Carol squealed, snapping rapidly as if documenting a rare cryptid. "Dinner is so suspicious, RNeber LOL," Noel narrated as he typed, adding a string of snowflake and skull emojis. The twins, still focused on their phones, didn't notice their own ice patches spreading across the floor like a growing spiderweb of frost. They slipped spectacularly, sending a plate of Christmas cookies flying in slow motion. The gingerbread men sailed through the air in perfect formation before shattering against the walls like festive shrapnel, leaving behind trails of sprinkles and frosting. "This is quite avant-garde," Sarah declared, examining the frozen pudding sculpture with the enthusiasm of a museum curator discovering a new masterpiece. She attacked it with increasingly larger utensils, graduating from a dessert fork to a serving spoon to what appeared to be a small chisel she'd retrieved from the garage, determined to serve her holiday treat. Max skidded into the kitchen, eyes shining with the pure joy only a 10-year-old could muster at the sight of destruction. "That was the coolest wipeout ever," he exclaimed, while the twins attempted to maintain their dignity, brushing cookie crumbs from their frost-covered clothes with supernatural grace that only made them look more suspicious. Emily whipped out her phone to record the twins' impossibly quick recovery, but Carol helpfully reached out to steady her with a grip that felt like winter itself. "Oops," Carol said flatly as ice crackled across Emily's screen, turning it into a useless block of frozen technology that would have looked right at home in an Arctic museum. "Now see here," Jack began, drawing himself up to his full height and attempting to channel centuries of predatory instinct. "The time has come for—" "Sarah!" Elsa interrupted, practically pressing her nose against the table runner like an art critic at a gallery opening. "This embroidery is lovely, but have you considered adding some frost detailing? I'm thinking something in a classic Nordic pattern." Her fingers twitched with barely contained creative energy. Sarah beamed as she served the rock-hard pudding, somehow managing to chip off pieces that looked more like ice sculptures than dessert, each portion a miniature work of frozen art. "It's so wonderful to try new things during the holidays," she enthused, while the Frost family stared at their plates in poorly concealed panic, their silverware already beginning to frost over at their touch. Emily watched with satisfaction as Noel attempted to manipulate his spoon with the careful concentration of someone who'd only read about utensils in books, his hand hovering uncertainly between different implements. Carol kept accidentally freezing her napkin to her lap, creating an ever-growing collection of frozen fabric in her attempts to free herself. Jack prodded his portion with mounting desperation, leaving tiny icicles with each poke, and Elsa became suspiciously interested in rearranging the table decorations rather than addressing her plate, adding delicate frost patterns to every surface within reach. Frost giants gone viral. Emily herded her family into the living room with the urgency of someone who'd just discovered definitive proof of aliens. She clutched her evidence box close, glancing nervously at the kitchen where Jack's muffled voice droned on about maintaining standards and proper hunting etiquette. The occasional crash of what sounded suspiciously like ice sculptures hitting the floor punctuated his lecture. "Okay, look," Emily said, spreading her collected items across the coffee table with methodical precision. "I've been taking notes all evening, and there's no way the Frosts are normal people." She pulled out her notebook, now slightly damp from its encounter with Carol's icy grip, the pages crinkling with a distinct frozen crackle. Sarah picked up the notebook, thumbing through pages of Emily's neat handwriting. Her eyebrows rose as she read aloud. "Subject Elsa appears to lower room temperature by approximately 15 degrees when agitated about table settings." "Oh, honey," she chuckled, patting Emily's hand with maternal reassurance. "Just because they're a bit eccentric doesn't mean they're supernatural beings. Remember when we thought the Hendersons were vampires because they only came out at night?" "Then explain this." Emily thrust her frozen phone forward, nearly catching her mother's sleeve. The screen sparkled with a thick layer of ice, Carol's fingerprints clearly visible in the crystalline pattern. Tiny fractals spread across the surface like a winter garden gone wild. John adjusted his glasses, squinting at the device and turning it over in his hands with scholarly interest. "Well, there are some great photo editing apps these days. Max showed me one last week that makes everything look like it's underwater. Technology is really something, isn't it?" "That's totally different, Dad," Emily protested, her voice rising with frustration. She could hear the twins giggling in the kitchen, followed by what sounded distinctly like an ice cube avalanche. Max bounced on the couch cushions, nearly upending Emily's carefully arranged evidence. His enthusiasm sent several suspicious items skittering across the coffee table. "But being able to freeze stuff is so cool. Can we keep them?" He grinned at his own pun, while Emily dropped her face into her hands with a groan that seemed to come from the depths of her teenage soul. "Look, I have more proof." Emily grabbed the family iPad, pulling up Elsa's Pinterest profile with fingers that trembled slightly from exasperation. "See these boards? Human marinades through the ages? Festive flesh-eating tips? Creative ways to serve long pork? How is this not suspicious?" Sarah leaned in, scrolling with interest, her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. "Oh, look at these gorgeous place settings. The ice sculptures are simply divine." She paused at a particularly red-themed board, her perfectly manicured nail tapping the screen thoughtfully. Though I'm not sure about this blood-red color scheme, perhaps a bit too dramatic for Christmas dinner. Maybe we could suggest a nice burgundy instead? Emily grabbed one of the Frost's scarves from her evidence pile, holding it up. The fabric seemed to writhe slightly in her grip, as if trying to escape. Feel how cold this is. The temperature drops like 10 degrees around their stuff, and I swear this scarf just tried to strangle me during dinner. John nodded sagely, stroking his chin. That'll be that energy-efficient AC system we installed. The airflow in this house is remarkable. He beamed with pride while Emily fought the urge to scream into the suspicious scarf, which was now definitely trying to wrap itself around her wrist. With mounting desperation, Emily produced her piece de resistance, the living snow globe. The tiny figures inside writhed in what was clearly terror, their miniature screams barely audible through the glass. One particularly dramatic figure appeared to be recreating the famous scene from The Scream. Max poked the globe enthusiastically, pressing his nose against the glass. The screaming sounds so realistic. It's like those Halloween decorations at the store. The figures seemed to shriek louder in response, their tiny hands pressing against the glass in a desperate plea for help. "Sweetheart." Sarah's voice took on that special tone reserved for overtired children and conspiracy theorists, the one that somehow managed to be both soothing and dismissive. "I know moving to a new house has been stressful, but not everything is a conspiracy. The Frosts are just creative people, very creative people with an interesting sense of style." "They must be method actors," John exclaimed, snapping his fingers with the satisfaction of someone who'd just solved a particularly challenging crossword puzzle. "Preparing for a holiday production. That explains the commitment to character, and the unusual dietary preferences, and the way Jack keeps calling us prey under his breath." "Dad, no," Emily started. But Max chose that moment to execute a particularly enthusiastic couch bounce, knocking into the evidence box. Items scattered across the floor in slow motion. The suspicious salt shaker that seemed to contain glowing crystals, the animated scarf that was definitely trying to escape, the screaming snow globe, and Emily's collection of frozen photographs showing the Frosts in various states of supernatural activity. Elsa chose that exact moment to glide into the living room, her platinum hair trailing wisps of frost. "Oh dear, what a mess," she said, instinctively waving her hand with the grace of someone arranging flowers. A sheet of ice instantly covered everything on the floor, freezing the evidence into a perfect winter tableau that wouldn't have looked out of place in a museum of the macabre. "What wonderful special effects!" Sarah clapped her hands in delight, completely missing the way the ice crackled with otherworldly energy. "You simply must tell me how you do it." Emily stared at her family's oblivious faces, then at the literally frozen evidence at their feet, where a tiny figure in the snow globe appeared to be writing "help" in microscopic letters. Her expression hardened with determination. If they wouldn't believe her proof, she'd have to find another way to expose the truth, and preferably before the Frosts decided to turn their holiday dinner into something more traditional for their tastes. Burning trees and melting traditions. Emily watched in disbelief as Jack Frost rose from his dining chair with all the dramatic flair of a B-movie villain, his silver hair catching the candlelight in what he clearly thought was a menacing way. "Enough," he declared, sweeping his arm wide and knocking over his untouched eggnog, sending the festive liquid streaming across Sarah's prized tablecloth. "It's time for the feast." His moment of menace deflated instantly as he tried to step forward, only to find his cape thoroughly tangled in the chair's spindles, the expensive fabric making embarrassing ripping sounds with each tug. "Dad, you're embarrassing us," Noel moaned, frantically tapping his frozen phone with fingers that left little frost patterns on the screen. "This is worse than the time you tried to make a TikTok. Way worse. At least then you only froze half the garage." Carol nodded glumly beside him, absently creating tiny ice sculptures of their social media followers. "We were about to go live with our Dinner with Dinner stream. Could have gotten at least 1 million views. The hashtags were perfect and everything." Across the room, Elsa pirouetted gracefully, her hands weaving intricate patterns in the air as ice sculptures materialized around the dining room, each one more Pinterest-worthy than the last. "The lighting needs to be more dramatic," she muttered, completely ignoring Jack's increasingly desperate struggles with the chair. "Perhaps some icicles here, and a frozen fountain there. Oh, and maybe some frost-covered roses climbing the walls. The ambiance must be perfect for consuming humans." Emily slipped away from the chaos, her socks sliding silently across the hardwood floor as she carefully positioned Max's toy flamethrower behind the living room couch. She'd borrowed it from his superhero costume collection, hoping the heat would at least slow the frosts down. The bright plastic looked ridiculous against the elegant holiday decor, but desperate times called for desperate measures. "Bravo!" Sarah clapped enthusiastically as Jack finally untangled himself, leaving behind several chair spindles wrapped in glittering cape fragments. "Such commitment to character. The special effects are simply magnificent. The way you make everything sparkle is just divine." John leaned forward in his chair, grinning with the unmistakable gleam of a man about to unleash his best dad jokes. "Oh, I get it. This is one of those murder mystery dinner parties, right? Though I have to say, you're really giving us the cold shoulder." Jack raised his hands, ice crystals forming at his fingertips, as he attempted to seal the doors with a dramatic flourish. "You will all become part of the Frost family tray." He paused mid-sentence as John chuckled, his concentration broken by the sheer dadness of the joke. "Looks like things are really starting to freeze up now, eh?" John elbowed Sarah, practically vibrating with delight at his own wordplay. "Talk about a chilly reception." The twins cornered Max by the fireplace, their eyes glowing an eerie blue that reflected off the brass fire screen. Max bounced on his toes, completely missing their predatory stance as he admired the special effect. "That's so cool!" he squealed, reaching up to try to touch their faces. "How do you make them glow like that? Can you teach me? Is it like those light-up sneakers? Mine have dinosaurs on them." "Jack," Elsa called out, examining his handiwork with a critical eye while adjusting her own perfectly styled hair. "The icicles are all wrong. They should be pointing downward at a 45-degree angle for maximum menace. And that frost pattern? It looks more like a summer snowflake than a proper feast decoration. Did you even look at my mood board?" Emily seized her moment, diving for the flamethrower with the grace of someone who'd watched too many action movies. She aimed it at the nearest frost, squeezed the trigger, and watched in horror as the stream of heated air hit the Christmas tree instead. The dry needles caught instantly, sending flames racing up the branches and making the ornaments pop like festive fireworks. "No, no, no!" Jack's voice cracked with panic, hitting a pitch that probably shattered several of Elsa's ice sculptures. "This isn't how it goes. The ancient scrolls said nothing about flames. Where's the part about the graceful consumption of our prey? There was supposed to be an interpretive dance." "Don't worry, we got this." The twins moved in unison, shooting ice from their palms with the confidence of teenagers who'd never faced real consequences. Instead of stopping the fire, they created a series of slick barriers that turned the floor into an impromptu ice rink. Oh my God, this would make the perfect TikTok challenge. #Frozen Feast fail. Quick, Carol, get the ring light. Sarah stepped carefully around the spreading chaos, somehow maintaining her perfect hostess smile while navigating the increasingly treacherous floor in her holiday heels. What an exciting performance. The special effects are so realistic. Would anyone like more coffee, or perhaps some ice water? She chuckled at her own joke while dodging a falling icicle that embedded itself in the turkey platter. Emily watched in frustration as Jack slipped and slid across the floor like a penguin in dress shoes, his cape now frozen to his legs in a way that made him look like a very confused mermaid, while Elsa frantically tried to turn the burning Christmas tree into an abstract ice sculpture representing the duality of fire and frost, with undertones of seasonal transformation. "Mom," Emily tried one last time, gesturing at the winter wonderland their dining room had become. "They're literally creating ice out of thin air." "Yes, dear," Sarah nodded approvingly, straightening a place setting that had been knocked askew by a stray blast of frost. "The effects budget for this holiday entertainment must be impressive, though I do hope they have insurance for any water damage. Should I put on some festive music to enhance the atmosphere? A cocoa-powered counterattack." Max darted between the frozen furniture, wielding his hot cocoa squirt gun with gleeful abandon. The warm liquid arced through the air, leaving trails of steam in the frigid room before hitting Noelle square in the face. The Frost twin let out a shriek that could have shattered windows, their usually perfect complexion now streaked with rivers of foundation. "My contour!" Noelle wailed, desperately pawing at the melting makeup while frost crystals formed between their fingers. "Do you know how long this took? I had to watch 3 different YouTube tutorials." "This is way better than a snowball fight." Max pumped the squirt gun again, taking aim at Carol with the precision of countless video game battles. "Pew, pew! Take that, ice monster!" Carol dove behind an ice sculpture, only to collide with Elsa, who was meticulously adjusting the angle of her latest creation, a terrifying bunny that somehow looked more like a marshmallow. "The ambient lighting needs to be more menacing," Elsa muttered, completely ignoring the chaos around her as she squinted at her work. "Perhaps if I add some icicles here, maybe a crystal chandelier?" Sarah gracefully pirouetted across the ice-slicked floor, her holiday dress swishing around her ankles as she snatched up flaming ornaments from the burning tree. "I really must apologize for this," she called out, hurling a blazing silver ball with surprising accuracy, all those years of softball practice finally paying off. It exploded against Jack's shoulder in a shower of sparks and glitter. "But attempting to eat my children is simply not acceptable dinner party behavior, though I do appreciate your creative approach to holiday entertainment." Emily worked methodically through the mayhem, stringing Christmas lights in strategic locations while consulting the diagram she'd sketched in her detective notebook. Meanwhile, Jack posed dramatically in the center of the room, his cape billowing in a non-existent wind that he'd clearly practiced creating. "For centuries, the Frost family has upheld our sacred traditions," Jack declared, completely oblivious to Emily's activities as he gestured grandly with his frost-covered hands. "We have traveled far and wide, seeking the perfect—" He paused, frowning as his theatrical momentum faltered. "Carol, are you recording this? The lighting needs to be just right for maximum intimidation factor." "Obviously." Carol steadied her phone while ducking another stream of hot cocoa, their perfectly styled hair now dripping with marshmallow bits. "This is going to break the internet. #FrostFamilyFail is trending already." We've got more views than that video of the cat riding the Roomba. The composition is all wrong. Elsa abandoned her ice sculpture to rearrange a cluster of icicles near Jack, her artistic sensibilities clearly offended. We need more dramatic backlighting for our victory scene. Perhaps if we moved that lamp. No, the credenza. Maybe if we froze the windows in a diamond pattern? John backed away from the increasingly bizarre scene, his hands raised in what he probably thought was a peaceful gesture, but looked more like an awkward dance move. Now, let's all just cool down. His hip bumped the snack table, sending a full pot of hot apple cider flying through the air in slow motion. The steaming liquid caught Jack directly in the face, interrupting what promised to be another lengthy monologue about family honor and proper seasoning techniques. Oops! John winced sympathetically, though his eyes twinkled with barely suppressed amusement. Talk about getting into hot water, though I suppose that's better than getting into hot chocolate. Emily seized her moment, yanking on the Christmas lights with all the determination of a teen who'd spent way too much time studying Home Alone tactics. They tightened around Jack just as the circuit overloaded, creating a spectacular light show that would have made Clark Griswold proud. Jack yelped, sliding across the floor like a very festive penguin in his designer winter coat. Our followers need to see this. Noel raised their phone higher, frantically trying to capture the perfect angle, only to screech as Max's hot cocoa struck true with deadly accuracy. No, my phone. Our viral moment. We were about to hit 10,000 likes. The aesthetic is ruined, Elsa wailed, as her carefully crafted ice sculptures began to melt from the combined heat of the burning tree and flying cider. The winter wonderland transformed into something more appropriate for a water park, complete with impromptu slides and what looked suspiciously like a frozen fountain that was now spouting lukewarm water in elegant arcs. Sarah twirled past, somehow managing to look elegant while wielding tinsel like a weapon, her real estate agent smile never wavering. I hope you don't mind aluminum tinsel, she called out cheerfully, throwing handful after handful with the precision of someone who'd spent years decorating model homes. It's vintage, and so much more environmentally friendly than the plastic kind. The twins attempted to scramble away from Max's relentless pursuit, their usually graceful movements hampered by melting ice and puddles of hot chocolate, only to crash directly into Jack as he struggled to his feet. The three Frosts went down in a tangle of limbs and ice, sliding across the floor in an ungainly heap that looked like a failed Olympic figure skating routine. I guess they're really falling for us, John beamed at his own joke while carefully stepping around the growing puddles, looking entirely too pleased with himself. You could say they're having a meltdown. Jack lay sprawled on the floor, his meticulously styled frost hair now resembling a sad, melting snowman after a spring rain. Sarah appeared above him, somehow still immaculate despite the chaos, holding out a festive holiday towel decorated with prancing reindeer. Would anyone like some warm cookies while we sort this out? She asked brightly, as if serving refreshments to would-be cannibals was perfectly normal hostess behavior. They're chocolate chip. I also have snickerdoodles, and I can put on another pot of cocoa, the drinking kind this time. Thawed hearts and waffle wisdom. Emily watched as the Frost family huddled together on the soggy couch, looking less like terrifying frost giants and more like a group of dejected snowmen after a warm day. Jack kept trying to reshape his drooping frost hair, which now resembled wet cotton candy. Little puddles formed beneath their feet, and the expensive upholstery would never be the same, but Emily found she didn't really mind anymore. We are literally The worst cannibals in frost giant history, Jack moaned, slumping further into the cushions. His shoulders drooped so low they nearly touched his knees. Centuries of tradition, and we can't even manage a simple holiday feast without getting defeated by hot beverages and Christmas lights. Great-grandfather Glacius would be so disappointed. Emily stepped forward, her evidence notebook clutched to her chest. The pages were slightly crinkled from her death grip, and several sticky notes poked out at odd angles. She'd spent the last hour repurposing it from suspicious neighbor activities to modern holiday traditions, a guide for frost giants, complete with color-coded sections and detailed diagrams. "Look, you're clearly better at making TikToks than eating people," she said, flipping through her carefully annotated pages. Several sheets were still damp from the earlier chaos. "I mean, have you seen your view counts? Your hashtag is trending in 3 countries. Noel and Carol perked up immediately, phones materializing in their hands as they scrolled through their feeds with frost-tipped fingers. "Oh, my Frost, she's right," Carol exclaimed, elbowing her twin in excitement. "Our failed cannibal content is getting way more engagement than our menacing frost giant posts. That video of Jack slipping on the hot cider already has 50,000 likes. The comments are gold." Sarah bustled in from the kitchen, carrying a towering plate of fresh waffles that steamed invitingly in the cool air. Her holiday apron was dusted with flour and sparkled with tiny ice crystals. "Who's hungry? I added extra whipped cream." She set them down in front of Elsa, who cautiously picked up a fork instead of analyzing their flesh content, as she had with the turkey. The utensil immediately frosted over in her grip. Jack watched his daughter take a tentative bite, then straightened up with a determined look that made his frost hair wobble precariously. "I suppose I should try to— what do you humans call it?" "Ah, yes, make a joke." He cleared his throat dramatically, causing several icicles to form on the ceiling fan. "What do you call a frozen waffle? A eggfest." John's face lit up like the Christmas tree before it had caught fire, his eyes crinkling with pure joy. "That's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Sarah, we're keeping them. I finally have someone who appreciates proper humor." He was practically bouncing in his seat, already mentally cataloging his entire repertoire of breakfast-related puns. In the kitchen, Elsa had discovered the joy of decorating Christmas cookies. Her frost powers created intricate snowflake patterns that would have made professional bakers weep with envy, each one unique and glistening like diamond dust. "This is so much more satisfying than trying to figure out how to serve them with human flesh," she admitted, adding a delicate icy border to a star-shaped cookie. The kitchen counter had become her personal winter wonderland, complete with tiny ice sculptures between the cooling racks. Max had taken it upon himself to educate Noel and Carol in the art of hot chocolate consumption. The twins watched in fascination as he demonstrated the proper marshmallow-to-cocoa ratio, their silver eyes wide with wonder. He'd already gone through 3 cups himself, and his sugar-fueled enthusiasm was reaching new heights. "And this doesn't melt you?" Noel asked, poking at their steaming mug with a finger that instantly created swirling frost patterns on the ceramic. "That's not how humans work," Max explained patiently, bouncing slightly in his chair. "We're like warm all the time anyway. It's like having a built-in heater. Watch." He pressed his warm hand against Noel's cold one, giggling at the startled look on the frost giant's face. Emily sat at the dining room table with the Frost family, helping them draft an official declaration on her laptop. The keys were slightly frozen, but she managed. "We, the Frost family, hereby renounce our ancient traditions of consuming human flesh," she read aloud, adjusting her glasses. Though we reserve the right to occasional light freezing for entertainment purposes only, and TikTok content, she added as an afterthought. Later, they gathered around the hastily redecorated Christmas tree, which now sparkled with a combination of traditional ornaments and Elsa's ice crystals. The Frosts approached the pile of presents with careful curiosity, relaxing only after John assured them multiple times that no one was wrapped inside any of the boxes. Carol still poked each gift suspiciously with a frost-covered stick, just to be sure. In the corner, Sarah and Elsa were already deep in discussion about next year's decorations, their heads bent together over a tablet displaying Pinterest boards. "We could do an ice sculpture garden," Elsa suggested, sketching designs in frost on the window with elegant sweeps of her hand. "No running humans this time, just elegant swans and maybe a fountain? I'm thinking a Frozen meets Versailles aesthetic." "Oh, that would look lovely with the new LED light display I've been eyeing." Sarah clapped her hands excitedly, her real estate agent's mind already calculating the boost to their property values. "We could do a whole winter wonderland theme." John and Jack had claimed the love seat, trading increasingly terrible puns like they'd been waiting their whole lives for this moment. "What do you call a snowman with a six-pack?" Jack asked, grinning so wide his teeth sparkled like icicles. "An abdominal snowman." "Why don't mountains like holidays?" John countered, practically vibrating with excitement. "Because they're snow fun." Both families groaned in unified horror as the dad jokes continued to flow like an unstoppable avalanche of awful puns. Emily made a mental note to start a separate notebook just for documenting their combined dad joke arsenal. The day ended with everyone in the backyard, engaged in the most magical snowball fight the neighborhood had ever seen. The Frosts used their powers openly now, creating perfect snowballs and occasional ice slides, while the Brightons had developed surprisingly good aim with their hot chocolate squirt guns. Max had somehow convinced Noelle to give him frost giant riding lessons, which mostly consisted of zooming around on sheets of ice while Sarah tried not to have a heart attack. "You know," Jack admitted to John as they watched their families play, his frost hair finally starting to regain its usual majestic shape, "this is much more fun than our traditional feast would have been, though I do hope the neighbors don't mind all the ice sculptures in their yards." As the winter sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow-covered yard, Emily watched the peculiar scene unfold before her. Her notebook, now filled with detailed observations about frost giant behavior, had a new section titled "Actually Kind of Cool Things About Our Weird Neighbors." The Frost family gathered their belongings, an odd assortment of magical snow globes, partially frozen phones, and what appeared to be a completely unnecessary cookbook titled "How to Cook Humans," with the word cook now crossed out and replaced with befriend. Elsa had insisted on keeping it for sentimental reasons. "Next weekend, same time," Sarah called from the doorway, wrapped in 3 sweaters to combat the lingering chill. "I'm thinking we could try that ice sculpture cooking class idea." Elsa's eyes lit up like fresh frost on a window pane. "Oh yes, I've been practicing my technique. Did you see my latest Pinterest board? Frozen feasts that don't include the neighbors?" "The algorithm is going to have questions," Emily muttered, but she couldn't help smiling as she watched Max teaching the twins how to make snow angels without accidentally creating mini ice storms. "Remember," Max instructed seriously, his winter coat covered in sparkly frost patterns, "you have to move your arms like this, not like you're trying to freeze someone solid." Noelle and Carol lay in the snow, their silver hair spreading out like halos as they attempted to follow Max's instructions. Their movements were still a bit too sharp, creating jagged ice patterns instead of smooth snow angel wings, but they were clearly having fun. This is way better content than our How to Prepare a Human series, Carol admitted, holding their phone steady despite their brother's attempts to photobomb the shot. Which got 0 likes anyway, Noelle added, carefully adjusting their matching scarves, now decorated with tiny bells instead of icicle daggers. John and Jack stood by the garden gate, sharing one last round of terrible weather puns. Emily rolled her eyes as she heard her father ask, "What do you call it when a snowman has a temper tantrum? A meltdown." Jack's booming laugh sent icicles tinkling from the nearby trees. Sarah emerged from the house carrying a large container. "Here's some leftover cookies for the road, and don't worry about the freezer burn. I think they actually taste better that way now." Elsa accepted the container with a graceful nod, frost patterns swirling automatically across its surface. "Next time, I'll bring my special snow cone machine. It's much more practical than our old family recipes." The twins finally extracted themselves from their snow angel attempts, brushing off ice crystals as they checked their latest TikTok stats. "We're going viral," Carol announced, showing the screen to everyone nearby. "Our top 10 reasons not to eat your neighbor's video just hit 1 million views. Number 1 being that they make better TikTok collaborators than main courses," Noelle added with a grin, high-fiving Max. Emily watched as her little brother gave each of the twins a warm hug goodbye, leaving small patches of melted frost on their designer winter coats. She had to admit, for ancient cannibalistic frost giants, they'd turned out to be pretty decent neighbors. The Frost family made their way down the path, leaving a trail of delicate ice patterns that would melt by morning. Jack turned back one last time, his frost hair now styled in what he called his modern, less threatening look. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries, but warming with genuine gratitude. "For showing us there's more to holiday traditions than, well, you know." "Eating people?" Emily supplied helpfully. "That's my girl," John chuckled, wrapping an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "Always straight to the point." As the Brightons waved goodbye from their front porch, Noelle and Carol could be seen setting up one final shot in front of their house. Their phones glowed in the twilight as they posed, their synchronized movements creating a perfect frame of ice crystals around them. "And posted," Carol announced. "How Not to Eat Your Neighbors, a Frost Family Guide to Modern Holiday Traditions. Hashtag Frost Life, hashtag Neighbor Goals, hashtag No Humans Were Harmed in the Making of This Video," Noelle added, their fingers flying across the frozen screen. Emily watched the frosts disappear into their own winter wonderland of a front yard, where ice sculptures now posed gracefully instead of menacingly. She pulled out her notebook one last time, adding a final entry. Conclusion: sometimes the strangest neighbors make the best friends, even if they occasionally forget not to freeze the potato salad. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this fun holiday book.